Welcome to Good Grief, the podcast where resilience meets reality. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Malone. In this podcast, we delve deep into the stories of individuals who've triumphed over tragedy, adversity, and trauma. In every episode, we bring you raw and honest narratives from guests who faced life's most challenging moments head on. Through candid conversations, they share their journeys of resilience, shedding light on the strategies, mindset shifts, and support systems that empowered them to rise above their darkest hours. Join us as we explore the profound depths of human resilience and discover how, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and yes, good grief. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. My guest today is Olivia Abousaid, and she is a grief and transformation coaching person. We're going to hear about what she does and a very sensitive topic, which is on genocide and war and grief in that area. Very important topic. So, Olivia, if you would like to introduce yourself and just tell us a bit about what you do.
Thank you. I appreciate being here today. Thanks for giving me the time and the space to speak to your listeners. So I'm a grief and transformation coach, as you said. I was born and raised in Dallas, Texas, to Palestinian immigrant parents. I'm firstborn, first generation, first American on both sides of the family. And I think it's funny because I think that grief work for me kind of started a long time ago. I was kind of growing up and in my early teenage years when the first Gulf War was happening, and we were getting death threats at our house just by virtue of being Arab, being Palestinian. There was a lot of anti-Arab sentiment going on at the time, and that, of course, it was traumatic. It felt very isolating. I had grown up thinking I'm just another ethnic American kid. I didn't see myself as being different than anybody. And it was very eye-opening to me at the time. I realized, people do see us as different and they hate us for being different. And
were you in a community where there was not much of other people, Palestinian immigrants in your area, or?
There were some. My parents were active in the Palestinian community in Dallas, and so we knew people. We were active in the community and in speaking out for Palestine. Okay. But there was just a lot of that going on at the time.
Yeah.
And so, when I got into coaching, I first of all started out just wanting to do the transformation part of it, but something was kind of pulling at me, the grief part of it, because there's so much grief tied into bearing witness to genocide, bearing witness to war from racism. A few years ago, a friend asked me a question that really stayed with me. She said, "How have you grieved the racism you've experienced?" And I had never even thought about it. It was so mind-blowing to me. I had never thought to stop or that grief might be associated. I think it was so deep-seated and so subconscious for me that I never even thought about it as grief.
Yeah.
It just stayed with me. And I was like, I don't know, you experience it and you move on. You don't take any time to deal with that. Of course, it hurts you, it angers you, but that's it. You just move on.
Yeah, you think about it as your norm, right? I mean,
exactly.
I have a close friend who's African American, and I witnessed something out in my community that was extremely offensive towards someone who was African American, and I mentioned it to him, and I said, I just wasn't real sure how to respond because I wanted to interject in this situation and say something. I thought, is it my business? I don't know. And he said, you know what? It's so normal that I don't even hear it anymore. And I went, wow, that's just. He was kind of like I. As a white privileged person, I was like, I had never even thought of that before. So it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. And so that question stayed with me, and that there is a need to grieve the or grieve the racism that you've experienced. There is a need to make some space for that and take some time with it and say that, it wasn't okay. And how do I want to proceed going forward? And then these days, there's so much grief associated with the genocide that's happening in Palestine, in Sudan, in Congo, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Ukraine. There's so much to grieve these days besides the regular like economy and job loss and things like that. There's, I think people are really calling out for that right now. And so that's really what kind of mobilized me to want to do grief and transformation.
So tell us a bit about, because I mean, you would you say you like specialize in sort of the genocide part of it and all that issues of war, all that kind of stuff? Is that something kind of like your niche, I guess I would say?
I would say that the niche is really grief and transformation, but since I am from the Palestinian community, it's something that I can speak to on a really personal level. There are a lot of therapists, coaches, mental health practitioners out there who've really been, I've heard a lot that they've really been kind of gaslighting their patients or both sidesing their patients, othering their patients, and they don't feel heard. Of course, there are a lot of great mental health practitioners and therapists out there, but I keep hearing that again and again, that people are feeling like they're not being heard when they want to talk about these genocides because they've been so highly politicized.
Yeah.
So I want people to know that this is a safe space for them, that I understand what they're going through because I'm also going through it and using these coping mechanisms to get through it.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about, I know one of the things that for the information my assistant collected, she said something about survivor's guilt when you're bearing witness to some of these issues, crimes. I don't even know what word to use there. So tell us a bit about why, I mean, I think I know a lot about survivor's guilt, but not in this context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely been very prevalent, especially after October 7th first happened and things escalated very quickly. It very quickly became a genocide. And so, you're seeing your own culture, your own ethnicity of people who are experiencing this and they're trapped. There's nowhere for them to go. I have family in the West Bank, and life there is getting more difficult for them. And so you feel this guilt about living in such a privileged place in the US. Like we don't have any wars going on here on our own territory. We all have a roof over our heads. We don't have to worry about a random bomb or a missile coming in anytime to kill us. And so there's a guilt with that. A friend invited me to go to a concert shortly after October 7th happened. And my mind was just not there. I was like, how can I be here enjoying this when these horrific things are going on with my people? Yeah. And I think there's a lot of that these days within the Arab and Middle Eastern and Muslim communities.
Yes. Well, yes. I mean, I imagine that there's been not just for, when 9/11, all that kind of stuff, everything that came up all on this times, it's just really led to a lot of discrimination and racism of people from the Arab community, which is a totally different topic in and of itself that could take us all day and then some to unpack. So tell us a bit about like your coaching and your transformative for grief and that kind of stuff. What kind of stuff do people come to you with, and how are you helping them?
They'll come to me with the grief of that, but also there's job loss, or there's a career that they've been working towards for a while that is just not happening for them. There's a lot of grief associated with that. They went to school for that, and they've been going through all these interviews and gearing their life in certain ways, and it's just not happening for them. There's a lot of sort of job career stuff associated with grief. I'm seeing that a lot with my clients. There's chronic illness, or having dealt with chronic illness at an early age, and that kind of grief and trauma sort of staying with them throughout their lives. Yeah. there's a lot of sort of entrenched grief that people come to me for.
Yeah. So is it mostly, I'm thinking of a lot of the different guests I've had on this show, as you were saying that, and the different things they've had to learn to live with, if you will. So is it just kind of, I mean, if someone's coming to you and I've got this, autoimmune disease that's not going to get any better, is the idea to help me accept that? Or, I mean, because you can't fix me. So it's like one of those
Right.
areas. Yeah, it's one of those areas where I can't fix you, but how can I help you? I can still help.
Exactly. Yeah, I make that clear to my clients is that I'm not a medical doctor. I can't fix the chronic illness.
Yeah.
But, I also have a chronic illness. And so there's taking the time and the space to grieve with that,
Yeah.
to grieve your limitations. Some people were diagnosed a little later in life, or some people have had it their whole lives and um, have watched other people be able to do things that they can't do.
Yeah.
And I think COVID sort of magnified that a lot for people. Um, and so, it's learning to sit with that grief, to let yourself take that time and space. But for me, it's not just grief coaching, it's grief and transformation. There's a second part to it. There's another side of the coin in which you say, I'm going to take the time to grieve and also know that there are things I can do. I'm not a broken person. I can transform my life in different ways. There are things that I can do. I can take action in certain ways. I can feel empowered in certain ways. And so I think it's a really important message to remind people you're not a broken person.
Yeah.
You don't have to sit at home and wilt away and do nothing. We still have agency. We still have empowerment. And so that's, it's twofold. It's honoring your grief and knowing that you can take action and do things in the world.
Yeah. You know what my thinking of when you said that is I've had people many times over the years, when they're have a new grief episode say to me, when is it going to be like it was before this happened? Or when am I going to feel like I did before this happened? And I have to pause because my answer is, well, never. I mean, you're never going to go back to not knowing what this was like because you experienced this. So when people say, you got to get past it or get over it, it's like, no, you really can't. Just,
Yeah.
But I love your messages, learn what you can do and do those things, but to accept what it is that we've lost or are going to lose in some cases and so on, which I think is a much more powerful message. It gives me, like you said, I have empowerment now to where I can now say I'm in charge of this thing. I can't change this other thing, but I can at the very least, learn this and move on and do something with what I know now. So I think that's a great message.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be a tough road to acceptance, and some things are ongoing, like genocide. We don't know when this is going to end in Palestine and Sudan and Congo. We don't know when these genocides are going to end. And in many ways, it's not just about the genocide, it's about the social injustices and the imperialism, colonialism, capitalism. I mean, that's, something we can get into endlessly, but these are systemic things that are kind of lifelong things that aren't going to go away anytime soon. And so it's acceptance, not in that I accept that these things are happening, so I'm going to live my life and not worry about them or pay attention to them. It's an acceptance that there will be ongoing grief, but that, also we don't have to sit around not doing anything either.
Yeah. The word permission comes to mind for me. It's like people need to be given permission to say it's okay to grieve these things. Like when you're talking about it's happening, half the world away, but it's happening to people that you may share an ancestry with or something. So yeah, it's totally okay for you to be grieving that, whatever that loss might be or that political climate or whatever terrible thing it is.
Right.
I think that's part, I think when I think about survivor's guilt too, it kind of comes into play with that, with people are thinking, well, I don't have it as bad as so-and-so does, but no, but you'd still do have this thing that is confronting you and can be addressed and so on. So that I think is probably a big important message for people. You can actually have permission to do this. So I know your website, you are called PACT, PACT Coaching.
Correct.
And the services you have, it looks like people can do packages for coaching and so on. Looks like you have grief packages, so on and so forth. So you want to tell us a bit about that?
Right. I have, I'm Pact Coaching. It's pact-coaching.com. And I have two packages. They're mostly the same. One is a 6-month package. One is a 12-month package, depending on how long people want to work with me. The 12-month package offers some toolkits that people can use. And then it allows people some more email contact with me. The reason I just have those two packages versus like a 6-week package is because we're talking about grief here. You know, it's these are things that, you know, it takes time to work on these things. It takes time to honor that grief, to talk about it, to delve into it, to work on these tools and these coping mechanisms, etc. So I want to give people the time that they need to work on these things without feeling that they have to be rushed through a package.
Right. No, I fully support that. You also mentioned before we started recording about your grief toolkit. So tell us a bit about that. I think you said it was specifically for people regarding genocide. What that is and how someone can find out more about that.
It's on my website. It's a 40-page grief toolkit that I put together. There's just been a lot of calls within the community for resources to help them sort of get through this hyper grief that people are experiencing right now and bearing witness to genocide. So I put together this toolkit that kind of starts out with defining the different types of grief. It addresses the the cultural grieving within the Arab community. It is especially geared towards the Palestinian community, but it's for anybody bearing witness to genocide or grieving genocide. I think they'll find it especially helpful. It lists resources like organizations that you can donate to, different films you can watch, different social media channels that you can, or accounts that you can follow to learn more about what's going on. Different books that you can read to educate yourself. There are some therapists listed. There is legal, if people are experiencing discrimination in the workplace, there's some legal resources. So I tried to be as comprehensive with it as possible. And people are always welcome to send me questions or comments like, maybe you should add this or this. And I'm happy to amend it based on what people need. But it talks about meditation, reflection, practicing gratitude, journaling. So I tried to make it as comprehensive as possible, as a toolkit can be, without actually going through the coaching process. So people can find some immediate answers and resources to help them get through this.
Yeah. And we will, in the podcast notes for your podcast, we'll have a link for listeners can find your website. One question I have, as I already refer to myself as a white privileged woman, what advice would you give to someone who maybe has a coworker who's, a Palestinian descent, whatever, and they are dealing with this, but it's like, we don't even know what to say or to do, or should we say anything? Should we do anything? Is it awkward? What advice would you say for maybe a neighbor or a coworker or someone that you know but maybe isn't your family?
That's a great question. And I think a lot of people have that question. I personally have a lot of friends who have not reached out to me yet. And I've heard from a lot of people that they kind of don't know what to say. So I think the key with that, that applies to any kind of grief. If you know somebody has lost a family member or is grieving genocide, just to say, hey, I don't know what to say, but I'd like to be there for you. How can I be here for you? It's such an important question. And I think sometimes people don't feel like they have the language to be there for someone. They haven't learned about the vernacular, basically the language to address that. And there is, I think you mentioned it at one point, within American culture, there is sort of an avoidance of talking about grief and death and things like that. But it's so important, whether it's genocide or if somebody has lost someone or they're grieving anything, to let people know that you do care, that you want to be for them. Maybe you don't know how to be for them, but you want to start that conversation.
Yeah.
And I did have a handful of friends who reached out to me and said, I don't know what to say right now, but it's horrible. What can I do? How can I be there?
So just kind of address it and just bring it up and say, I mean, I know this for grief, but I'm thinking specifically for someone who's witnessing genocide. That's not, it's not my culture. I think it's horrible as I see things on the news. I'm just, especially when it comes to children being involved, and I'm not even get started there, because that really tears me up. But I think to myself, I don't know what I would say. I hate to think someone is going to be like thinking, well, all people in a certain culture are all the same way. And that's kind of where I really share back and say, well, is it awkward to say something? Is it okay to say something? I mean, I suppose the person can say, yeah, actually, no, I'm good. And that's the end of the conversation, but at least I brought it up, I guess. That
right. It does show that you care, at least bringing it up is a great thing. It is one thing to say is that, grieving this genocide, again, because it's been so highly politicized, it's felt very isolating for a lot of people, myself included. There are a lot of Americans who are just going about their daily lives, and it seems like they don't care. You even try to open up the conversation and talk about it, and they change the subject, which is really disappointing, to say the least, because it's such a huge topic to you. There's so much grief, and it's such a huge topic in your world that for people to act like they don't care or to change the subject, it's very hurtful. So I would just, advise people that they don't have to be experts. They don't have to know everything. Just showing some caring, just reaching out in some way goes such a long way.
Yeah, well, I love your comment. How can I be here for you? I mean, I know I've had people when I've been through grief episodes in my life where my good friend might say, I don't have any idea what to say, but was there something I can do? Is there something, what did you have me do? Right. As in, they're just helpless. And I mean, part of it, I kind of feel like, as the person going through the grieving, I don't want to be responsible for telling you what to do. And now I have to give you a chore or something. So I always tell people, if you've got something you can just offer to do that, like, I just want to listen to you, or, can I take your kids to the park? Well, those types of things I think are helpful. But I think the whole thing of not shying away from it, especially if you don't know anything about it, doesn't really do that person any justice. It's actually disrespectful, I would say, to just sort of shove that off and think, well, that's your issue, not mine. And in fact, well, I don't even know what's your issue. You're here, you're not there. So I can see where that would be very, very hurtful.
Right. It is very hurtful. And I think, without getting into it too much, it kind of does speak to the privilege that we have in this country, where we don't necessarily have to care about what's going on with brown people or Black people in other parts of the world. And that needs to change at a systemic level, but on a personal level, just showing people that you care, that you want to be for them, is great. You brought up a great point of also, like, I shouldn't have to teach you how to be there for me. I think some people, it's different for different people.
Yes.
Some people do think that way, like, just be there for me. I don't want to have to teach you. And then some people are like, just ask,
Exactly. Especially when it's something you don't have any idea about. I mean, like, like I said, I see things on the news, but I don't delve into it. Where, like, okay, now, so what's happening with this? I see like the sensational thing, like a women's hospital being blown up, and I'm like, but the other parts of it, to talk to somebody about, what is it like, and then how can I support you? I guess would be the word I would use. How can I support you this time? Because I don't have the background, I don't have the mind frame, I don't have the culture, so it's like I don't really know. But I also don't want to feel like I can't help, or I can't step in, I can't be useful just because I don't have the same shared background.
Right. How can I support you is a great question. That's one of my favorite, if not my favorite questions. How can I support you? Yeah, I think there is just generally a lot of fear out there from people about what to say, how to be there. But there are things people can do, especially when it comes to this. There is boycotting, there's going to protests, there's trying to learn more about it, whether it be following certain news sources or reading some books. Um, there's contacting your representatives. There's a number of things that people can do, both the people who are grieving and the people who are supporting the people who are grieving, again, to not feel so helpless about the situation, whether they're experiencing the grief or they don't know where to start learning about it. There's always a place to start, and there's a lot of information out there. And I would just advise people not to take on a helpless stance about it. There's always things we can do.
Yeah. Well, there's I forget the famous saying about how, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem or something like that, if you're not working on something. And I happen to know from my own life experiences that even one voice can make a big difference in this world if we all get involved. So I think that's
Right.
I also wanted to touch on the thought that maybe someone's listening that's in your shoes. Maybe they have family or they're from an area that's war torn right now, and they're struggling with that. And they're thinking, okay, I don't know what to do. I don't know who to talk to. Or maybe they've thought about reaching out, but they're worried that people might say, well, why do you care? You're here, not there. Those types of things. I mean, what would you advise?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that going on these days. I would say the community's really in kind of a crisis mode. I've been in a few grief circles, and I've had some clients within my own practice who are just in crisis mode. Like the second you get on the video call with them, they start crying. A lot of them, because it's so heavy, and a lot of the time people aren't given the space or they're not listened to enough for them to really be able to let that out. So I would say find a space where you can be heard, whether that's with friends, with relatives, with a coach, with a therapist, um, or a counselor. But please try to find a space where you can be heard. It is a very isolating time right now. And that isolation can lead to a lot of depression. It can lead to suicidal thoughts. Unfortunately, that's a very big topic right now. In that, it's been over a year of this genocide, 76 years of this political oppression. So it's crisis mode, it's crisis time. And so I would just tell people, please go somewhere where you can be heard. And community is such a big one as well. That is one that I've found to be especially useful for me, and I think for a lot of people in such isolating times. Even if you're an introvert like I am, it's important to find communities of like-minded people who will listen and exchange these things. So, you're not alone in experiencing these things. A lot of us are grieving about this, and we're not alone. And there are people who are doing good work to fight back and take action, and just find your community. And, I'm a coach, but there are certain times where if somebody is in a real crisis mode, if they're suicidal or something, then we do have certain training, but at the same time, maybe they need to get on medication, or maybe they need to see a psychologist or something. You do what needs to be done for the client.
Yeah.
And I hope that people are finding help where they need it.
I would imagine, like someone who's living in a community that doesn't have a large sense of community because they're in a homogenous place, wherever they might be, online resources, I'm guessing, or groups or something they could find online for people to talk to that, really to be able, I like to use the word safe space to talk to people.
Right. Yes. Find your safe spaces online. Not all places where we live have those communities readily available. So definitely find those communities online. That's mainly where I found my communities, through social media and through grief circles, through different community events that are pro-Palestine or against the genocide. There are different things happening out there, whether they be in person or online, but the resources are there.
Just don't sit back and
they're growing.
Yeah. So I guess the message I'm getting from that is don't just sit back and suffer in silence, but reach out and you'll find people that can at the very least talk to you about it, which I think is, again, I know just talking about things can make me feel like at least I'm validated, or I'm whatever term you want to use there. So
yeah, which is easier said than done for some people, because some people are feeling so isolated and so depressed right now that reaching out in some way or another, when they don't even necessarily know who to reach out to,
right.
can feel like such a monumental task. And so, take those small steps, but definitely try to reach out to someone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm also going to add, like I always do, is there's zero shame in reaching out for help, whether it be for, you need a doctor or therapist or the medications or whatever. There's zero shame in that. It's whatever you need to do to get through whatever the event is you're getting through in a healthy way.
Agreed.
So, yeah. So Olivia, is there anything else you want to add before we finish today?
No, just, I think we've talked about some really good things, and I appreciate, you giving me this time and space again to address this. Again, it's been so highly politicized that not a lot of people, or not a lot of people necessarily want to hear it or listen to it. But I think it's important.
Yep.
To talk about, to address.
Yep. Because there's also that famous saying out there that if it's not you they're coming for today, it'll be you they're coming for tomorrow or whatever. So it's like, if it's just not your group, it doesn't matter. It's still a group of human beings, and we're all in this together. So I think that's an important thing for people to get themselves out of their heads and think about that too.
Yes, exactly.
Well, Olivia, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. It's an absolute pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Good Grief. We hope that the stories shared today have inspired and empowered you on your own journey of resilience. If you want to dive deeper into the themes of trauma, tragedy, and survival, be sure to check out my memoir, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival. In this book, I shared my own raw and honest experiences, offering insights and strategies for overcoming life's toughest challenges. You can purchase the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or listen to it on Audible. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful stories to light and spread a message of hope and resilience. Stay tuned for more incredible stories on our next episode. Until then, remember, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and good grief.